Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeremy Goodman. I'm 20 years old. I was born in Modesto, California, and I am currently serving in the U.S. Army as a chaplain assistant. I'm currently stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, at an infantry basic training battalion. Now, being a chaplain assistant, people automatically assume things about you. People assume that maybe you were brought up in a very religious family, and that you maybe have a very extensive religious background. And that's not necessarily the case. And with me, that actually really isn't the case. I didn't really come to Christ myself until the end of my high school years. And God taught me a really important lesson at this turning point in my life. And it was that sometimes when God's telling you to do something and you really feel like He is honestly telling you to do something, you may not understand it, but you just kind of have to go with it and just follow Him and trust that things will be okay. Now, I spent most of my life in California, out there on the West Coast, mainly in the Central Valley, in small little cities and towns such as Modesto, Escalon, Ripon, Oakdale. We spent most of my time in school out there, although we did take a break at one point and moved down to Phoenix. My grandpa owns some businesses down there, and my parents were helping him out in his time of need. So we were down there for about a year, and once again my parents got a little stir crazy, so we moved back to Modesto, California, where we stayed for the next couple of years. And a few years later, again, my parents got a little stir crazy, and they bought a home up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains there in California. It's actually not far to Sacramento. It's about an hour and a half in a small town called Copperopolis, California. Now, I know what you're thinking, Copperopolis, California, nobody's ever heard of it. Well, we call it Copper for short, and it's got a nice history behind it. It's a small little copper mining town, and it's actually situated right by a lake. So, being the fact that we live on a lake, kind of secluded, it's a really cool town to live in. Now, keep in mind that we were a small town, so we actually didn't have a school in our town. We had to bus to the next town for school. Well, the next town was also pretty small. It's Angels Camp, California. Well, it was about a 30-minute bus ride to Angels Camp, and being that was small too, and our county was made up of a bunch of small little towns. Most of these towns actually bused into Angels Camp for one collective school. Well, school was always pretty easy for me. And my parents like to tell the story because they say that ever since I was little, they knew that I was going to be really smart, just because I would ask questions and questions and questions. I had a question for everything ever since I could talk. And they were right. School was pretty easy for me. I floated through high school, really. I was that kind of guy who never really had to study, but, I always seemed to excel in most every subject. Well, I carried a 4.3 throughout high school, and I took all honors and AP classes. And come my senior year, I finished actually with a GPA of 4.3. But about halfway into my senior year, I started really getting miserable, and it wasn't a challenge for me anymore. So I wanted that challenge. So I talked to my guidance counselor, and we came to the conclusion that I needed out. So what we did, I actually enrolled in college for that second half of high school, and it was great. I had already had some AP classes taken, so once I passed those AP exams, those are college credits. So I had 9 college credits before I went to college. Well, when I went to college, I took 10 units during the second semester. So when I graduated with my class in 2007, I actually had 19 units. Well, it was a great thing. It was a great time for me because it was a really defining moment in my life. Now, having a 4.3 and graduating in the top of my class, naturally I got into most of the schools that I applied to. I got into some really good schools. But I actually decided to stay at that community college where I had been during high school just because, it was only $20 per unit. So, I could take a class for $60, and that was pretty awesome. So I decided to stay there. And it wasn't actually long into the semester before I really got miserable again. And I wanted out. It wasn't challenging enough. It wasn't anything. And it was about this time that I really started going to church with a friend of mine. She brought me there And I really liked it, and I started after I made my profession of faith. I started going, on Sundays and Wednesday nights, and it was real great. Life started looking up, but even though things were great, I still wanted that challenge in my life, because that challenge it's what I thrive off of. Because if you don't challenge me, then I'm not gonna do as well. So I actually started talking with an Air Force recruiter. Well, everything was great. I took the ASVAB, I scored high in the 90s, and everything was set. But the recruiter told me it was going to be a 6-month wait before I could go to basic training. So I said, forget that. And I started talking to the Marines. But the Marines didn't want to guarantee me a job, so I said, forget that. So I went and talked to the Army. And the Army said, we will give you a job in your contract. Well, naturally, that's what I wanted. And they were willing to ship me off to basic training the next week if I wanted. And I actually did end up leaving about 2 weeks later. But the defining moment of this process was when it came down to picking a job. Because I had always wanted to be a lawyer ever since I was little. And my parents always joked about, going to Harvard and all that good stuff. But naturally, paralegal was the obvious choice. But once again, as I said before, this was a defining moment in my life because of the fact that I just had started that relationship with God and things were going great, and I had this real deep personal relationship. So on that list there was a job, chaplain assistant, and naturally, what's a chaplain assistant? Nobody knows what a chaplain assistant is. Well, he told me that it was an assistant to the chaplain, who is like the pastor in the military. Well, I went home that night and I was thinking about it, and it just really felt to me like God was telling me, this is what I want you to do. And at that moment, I say that I believe in God and that I trust in God, but I figured, I got to be willing to trust in Him enough to do something that is not necessarily my first choice, but do it just because I feel like that's what He truly wants me to do. So I signed up as a chaplain assistant in the United States Army. I felt like maybe God was telling me that He wanted me, He was trying to call me to the ministry, to be a chaplain later on down the road and to help soldiers. Well, I've come to find out that I don't think that was so much the case. And actually, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of these infantrymen through this unit, a lot of times when my chaplain's not around. And a lot of times these guys just need somebody to talk to, somebody to relate to. And I've been able to, I feel, make an impact on some of these soldiers, and that's been awesome for me. Well, at the same time, I'm going to college online, and I'm actually farther ahead than I would have been if I just went to college. Right now I'm a junior, while most of my friends that I graduated with are sophomores. And God has really blessed me in the fact that I'm going to things like these Soldier of the Month, Soldier of the Year boards, and I excel really well in them, and my professional development has just been amazing. Well, I've decided that I'm getting out of the Army because I honestly don't believe anymore that that's why God wanted me to join the Army. I believe that He wanted me to join for one reason, and I found out that maybe it was for another reason, a hidden reason. And honestly, the conclusion that I've drawn from this is that you have to have faith in God, and sometimes He tests you by asking you to do something that you don't necessarily want to do, just because He wants to see if you trust Him enough to do it. And I'm here to say I'm living proof that if you trust in God and you take that extra step to show Him and to live in your faith, that great things will happen for you. Great things have happened to me. I've never been happier, and my life just seems like it's headed in the right direction. And I'll continue to live by this methodology, just because it's really it has defined who I am, and I believe that I'm a better person for it. But that is me, and if anybody has any questions or would like to talk to me, feel free to ask. All right, thank you.